So in an adaptive challenge, it's a situation where the answer isn't clear. It's something that maybe hasn't been seen before that must be solved with collaboration. Poverty, reforming public education, health reform in the United States are all examples of adaptive challenges. And you, in your work related to substance use and mental health, are really faced with adaptive challenges. So you need a community of practice to help guide you through this swampy lowland. So I wanted to say just a little bit about what is a community of practice. A community of practice is a group of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. It was initially coined by the anthropologist Jean Lave and Etienne Winger, and they wrote a book called Situated Learning and then another book called Communities of Practice. And when you listen to Jean Lave, she says, we are always learning what we are already doing. So a part of what a community of practice does is help to codify and replicate what you already know, what you're learning and doing in your practice. Now, Winger, when you listen to him, he is very focused on how do you make a community of practice work. And one of the things that he talks about is you have to really think about who is in the community of practice, who has the interest and the passion, and what is their need. And he tells this story about how somebody was having a community of practice and they were complaining because people weren't showing up. And he said, it's not a problem that people aren't showing up. It's the problem of who are the right people, what is their interest, how do you structure things so that you meet their interests, and how do you set up the situation that they have the time to participate in the community of practice. And so he talks a lot about the need for managers of communities of practice who understand the different layers of participation. And he talks about the core people who are doing the learning, bringing the evidence together, learning from each other, and that there might be some more distant partners, and those are almost people who are the customers of what the core group is learning, so that you don't expect everybody to be in the community of practice in exactly the same way. I think he's very wise, and a lot of his ideas are helpful in thinking about a community of practice. So in order to have a community of practice that is sustainable, their top 3 elements would be shared goals, which is a passion or belief in what it is that you're trying to accomplish, that there's leadership. And in this, we think about strong facilitation or backbone support, and then the time, that there is a value for the time, the personal investment that would be involved in both learning about each other and learning about excellence. As I mentioned in my work at the Georgia Health Policy Center, building communities of practice has been a way of life for us for over 20 years. And we have used 3 main principles or techniques to build our communities of practice that we've helped to lead. One is rapid whole system change, the other is technical assistance, and the third is evaluation. I think all 3 of these are valuable components. We've taken our rapid whole scale change from the Dana Miller Tyson Associates, and this is an approach of a flexible methodology that can be used at different levels, at different stages of the change process. And it stresses that the change is a journey and that each step can create critical elements that build on the next, and that people are involved in this process. Some of the principles of whole-scale change are creating an empowerment environment and participation, creating community, using reality as a key driver. So your experience and what you're facing is important part of the data, the common database that you have, that you see a future that you think is important and that you can create the change in real time. It's not like you participate in a community of practice and at the end you implement. It's a process where you're learning and implementing all the time. And that there is a practice of action research and a transfer of learning. Some of the things that are part of this whole-scale change are a concept called membership control goals. So when you come together, it's important that people think, yes, this is where I need to be. I'm in the right place. I should be a member of this group. And then there is the issue of who is in control, who's guiding this process, who's leading this process, and a clarity about that is important. And then there's the issue is what is our goal? What are we here for? What are we doing? And within this way of thinking, there's also this concept of converge, diverge. Today, we're converging. We're bringing a lot of people together and thinking about this in a broad way. This afternoon, we're going to do a layer of diverging when we are going to separate into 4 different groups, where we're going to learn in those groups. You may do even a further layer of diverging when you go back home and you're working in your own specific region. But then what I'm hoping is going to happen is that from this conference, you may already have some communities of practice that are beginning or that come out of the breakout sessions. In my vision, you'd be creating a community of practice around certain areas, maybe these 4 groups or maybe something else. I already see one emerging around co-occurring mental health and substance use from the work that Brigitte and I have done with you over the last year. And that perhaps the Health Research Board will be supportive of your learning together, maybe even providing a convening or leadership role to your work. I hope I'm not getting too far out ahead. But that would be my vision. And so that you would come back together in a medium-sized group and you would learn. And then perhaps there'll be another larger session where you converge into this larger group. And all the time, you're creating this whole system of learning and exchanging. You're learning from the literature. You're learning from outside and inside the UK. You're learning from your own practice. And you're bringing in, perhaps some of you are much more mature in your practice in a particular area, and others of you are just getting started. So you'd create a way that the ones that are just getting started can learn and become a part of a community of practice for those that are doing more. One of the things that you do in this is that you actually design a roadmap that includes a learning journey. So a learning journey might be, you say, okay, we're going to get together each month for 6 months. Some of it will be in person, some of it will be virtually, depending on the geography. And we're going to learn what's in the literature. We're going to learn what each other are doing. We're going to learn what other countries are doing. And each time we go away, we're going to think about what does this mean for us and how do we implement this in our practice. And then when we come back together, we're going to say, how did this help? What did this do? But this designing of the roadmap of that includes a learning journey is something that is important for the manager or the leader, the convener of the group to do. The other thing I want to mention is the formula for change. Dissatisfaction with the status quo and data, that's the D, plus vision, plus first steps is a formula for change. All of these things have to be present in order to overcome resistance to change. So if you don't have any one of these elements, if you don't have a dissatisfaction with the status quo and or data to support what it is that you want to do, if you don't have a shared vision for where you're going, and if you don't have first steps, then you won't have a change. So my challenge to you would be, I think you are all here because you want more data, you're thinking about the situation, you want it to be better. I think if you were to do a visioning exercise right now, you would have a very consistent vision of the future that you desire. It shows up in your plan, it shows up in our conversations for you. The thing that you have to leave today with is first steps, next steps. So I would suggest that when you get in your smaller groups, if one thing you could think about is there a community of practice here that might be valuable? And if there is, what might be the next steps? Even if it's only one next step, even if this next step is we're going to ask Brian to coordinate it for us, or whatever that is, the next step. Another part of our work in supporting communities of practice is technical assistance. This is where at the Health Policy Center we have supported over 1,400 different communities over the last 20 years, and we have had a diverse portfolio of technical assistance. And it is focused on sustainability, it's flexible, relationship-based, technical and adaptive, and refined through continuous learning and evaluation. And I want to point out just one thing about this stair step. So what this stair step is saying is, what do people need when they're building their local practice? And when they are just starting out, they probably need more individual attention. And then they might need some individual attention of getting going. But there comes a point when people have sort of gotten going that they're really ready to be involved with peers and peer-led work. And so I think that this is what the community of practice is about, is those that are ready to begin to share. Now, as you become more mature in your practice, then you're much able to just look at something or read about something and replicate it, or maybe go on a website and learn about something and replicate it. But earlier in your practice, you're needing to think about things in a little bit of a different way. So, evaluation. Over the last 8 years, I've been doing a lot of work with realist evaluation, which looks at what works for whom and in what circumstances. This has been a big part of our work with you over the last year, of not thinking about the yes or no, but more the how. And so in a realist evaluation, you think about what is our theory about what works. These are big words, but what it really means is, what do we think works? And then we collect information about the context, what's being done, and the outcomes, and look at those patterns to see, is what we thought working, is it really working? And then we revise what we're doing and then test it again. So we're looking at context plus mechanism equals outcome, and we're looking for the complex signature of outcomes. Now, the context is the individual, the interpersonal, the institutional, the infrastructure. The mechanism is a little more complex. This is looking at what is not observable, what is going on underneath the program and the outcome that is causing things to happen. And that has been the focus of our realist synthesis of the global literature that was guided by some of your theories, but also looked at the literature as it relates to this mechanism. So we're not saying, what time is it? We're saying, how does the clock work? And we're not trying to so much measure specific things in bar graphs or targets, but more looking at how do we learn together how the different pieces fit together as it relates to the work. This is a little preview of a paper that I'm working on with someone that I've been in partnership over the last 8 years. And the story of this is that when you have a clear definition of your practice, and you have a structure for looking at what works for whom under what circumstances, then you get to this top right quadrant where you're more positioned for success when you combine these two. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories, 3 stories quickly from the field, and then you're going to hear Brigitte's story. But I wanted to tell you about 3 communities of practice. I had a lot of examples, and I had a hard time choosing. But the first one is the Philanthropic Collaborative for a Healthy Georgia. This is a group of foundations who said, we fund a lot of different things. Some of us fund some health. We never know what to fund. Could you help us think about what to fund in our philanthropic investment? And so they went through a process of trying to find what's an area where we sort of have a common interest. And their shared interest was around school health. So there were about 25 foundations. They spent about 6 months in a learning journey and then about 2.5 years in an investment. And one of the things they wanted to decide was, do we just want to learn about this? Do we want to change our own individual practice in this? Or do we want to put our money together and invest together? And when our governor said, I'll match any money you put together, they said, oh, we want to put some of our money together. And so the Health Policy Center was their backbone. We guided their learning journey. The Centers for Disease Control was our expert as part of that. And that first bar graph shows what happened related to their money. They put together about $250,000 US dollars. It was matched by the governor. Because of the way it was structured with the university, we were able to get a federal match. And when these monies went out to the communities, then the communities were able to bring in some more local money. So what started out, for some of the foundations, as small as $5,000, ended up to be an overall $2 million investment. They did the same thing over again. You can see that second bar graph with rural health, where they started with a $500,000 investment, and with the capital stacks, went up to $4 million. So that was that one. With the federal government, this is where we work with all the communities nationally. We work with them in strategy, capacity, and sustainability. The federal government and the Health Policy Center provide the leadership. They have about 3 years for each of their grants. On these, there's a whole portfolio of support, but one of the most powerful parts of the support is bringing the communities that have similar interests together face to face for 3 days every year to be able to learn from each other and learn from experts. And what they're trying to get is better health outcomes in their communities. Another example is one that I'm working on now, which is called Bridging for Health. And we ask 7 sites nationally to think about how to look at the resources in their community in a different way and to put more money toward population health. And they independently came up with this concept of a pooled community fund where they have different sources. It might be banks, Chamber of Commerce, hospitals, pool money to use toward population health, and a structure that supports the decision making. We did have a little bit of a snag recently when they got the money on the table, then they weren't quite so trusting of each other, and they had to think a little bit more about having the structure that they wanted to make that happen. So that's another example of how a community practice came together and over 4 years developed an innovative approach to financing population health. Now, Brigitte, who has expertise in both behavioral health and communities of practice, is going to share an example from her work. And if you don't think you get quite enough of Brigitte and this little commercial that she's going to do about her work, you'll have a chance to interact with her more in the second breakout on co-occurring mental health and substance use, because she'll be a part of that breakout too. Brigitte.
Thank you. I am going to speak with you a little bit about work I did for 14 years with a program called the Children's Mental Health Initiative that is funded by our national government through the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which is part of Health and Human Services. So what you see on the screen is the report. We produced an annual report to Congress, and the national initiative is very large, and I was the national evaluator for it. And my partner in that work, the program, since its inception, has had family members as partners in the work. And so we partnered in the evaluation with the National Family Organization, which is pictured at the bottom there. And one of the things that we did beginning in 2007 was to develop communities of practice specifically around figuring out what was really working about families with the organizations and in helping families improve the mental health for their children and stabilizing the families. So we always had an assessment process in the evaluation, but we also had a lot of feedback from families and from other people that something's working, but we weren't capturing it very well. And the local family organizations needed to be able to better express that, and they needed to have a better understanding of what it was and what they were able to describe to be able to support their own funding, but also to be able to move things along so that there was a better understanding of the value of partnering with families. So one of the things that our work was around was building evaluation capacity of family organizations and then having better information that captured what that looked like, what the work of the individual organizations in many communities was like. So there was, in just thinking about some of those components of that work, there was a sense of purpose and motivation for the organizations to participate because they wanted to be able to demonstrate what was working for them, what their accomplishments were, what was working in the community. They could make progress in something that was challenging for them, which was evaluation, and they could build new skills within their organization on how to do that better. And then they had, as a group, the people that came together in the communities of practice, they had common goals in those areas in wanting to be able to demonstrate what was working well. And they developed a learning community. They were learning together. They were learning from each other. And they were building relationships and resources through that process. And we brought together research knowledge with community organizations. The way our process worked was to invite, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, invite organizations to come together and to apply for a process that involved both a member of the family organization and the person who was the local evaluator for the program. So they had to come as a team. Family organizations in the U.S., there's an organization called the National Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health, and they are the national partner with the Children's Mental Health Initiative, and they were our partner in our work. They have chapters all over the country, and then through the Children's Mental Health Initiative, those grantees, there have been over 150 grantees over the last 30 years, and they are all over the place, including in Guam and Puerto Rico and in Native American communities, and so there's a lot of diversity in terms of experience and location. And so we had to think about, first of all, anyone could participate. We knew of some best practice examples, but we wanted to be able to have a process that would make that work for everybody. And then the program supported at the time, they don't anymore in the same way, 2 grantee meetings a year, so there were opportunities for people to come together and meet in person at those meetings, but that was not something that we could guarantee. So there was a need to have virtual communities. And then we had to figure out how could we create the space for people to work together. And so some of those things that we needed to consider was if we had regular phone calls, how many people could actually speak on the calls, how would that work, how long could people participate, how would we build relationships, how would we build community, what would that look like? And so we had to think a little bit about how many communities could we effectively work with in a group, how many groups could we work with at a time, what would be the needs and the schedules and the commitments that people could make in terms of for themselves and for their organizations, fit that in with their daily lives and their work, which is quite busy under these grant programs. What we also wanted to do was be able to create some structure around that. So we actually developed an application process and a review process in order to select a limited number of communities that would participate. And that helped in a number of ways. First of all, we created our own decision-making process about what we thought was going to work, and we got input from communities on that. And we also raised the bar in terms of commitment because people were invited and they were selected specially to participate. And they had similar interests, so there was affinity among the groups. We eventually developed 3 groups. We started with 1 group and had the potential for having groups in different interest areas. What grew out of that first group was what we call the Parent Partner Assessment Work Group. And I don't recall exactly how many communities we had in the first group, but it was, I think, about 5. And that process started in 2007. The groups were working in 2008. Their purpose was to develop an assessment of the impact of family involvement, so that we had teams of evaluators, a team of an evaluator and a parent partner from the organization to work together to figure out how they could best assess what was working about their family services within their local communities. And we needed to develop indicators on that. We needed to understand what those pieces looked like. And we brought people together. Actually, it turned out to be a 3-year project. Didn't start that way. It started with my family partner organization coming to me and saying, do you think you would be able to put this in the grant? I want to do this. Is this going to work? And I said, sure, let's write me something and we'll put it in and we'll see if that flies. And so it started with an idea, and we had to start from there to build it and build it from scratch. And it became actually enormously successful. And we talked about PPAW, the Parent Partner Assessment Work Group, for many, many years, and we still talk about it because the group came together so well, and we made a lot of progress in terms of being able to have a better understanding of what actually works about the parent services that were provided, which were part advocacy, part mentoring, part problem solving, part being there and guiding people through the experience of getting mental health services, which often involve multiple agencies. And where that actually developed to, in which we did not expect at all, was that we set some goals originally, that they needed to make progress on their individual projects, but they should also keep an eye to the larger whole in terms of what the organization and the program could benefit from their work. And it ended up, after 3 years, that we actually moved forward towards getting certification for parent partners, and many states now have certification programs for parent peer support in mental health, and some of them in Georgia, where I am, they're Medicaid billable services, and then that also helps the family organizations to have additional income. But we did not have that vision at all when we started out. We just wanted to figure out how to bring this process together. And that developed in a lot of ways, because not only did they work on their local work, but they made presentations at national meetings, they collaborated with researchers, which they weren't expecting, and they also raised the focus on parent support, and that helped move along the certification process. So all of those kinds of things around creating some structure and so forth helped our process and helped organize us. So we had to think about just to sort of bring back to the virtual communities, we had to think about a lot of different ways that people could come together. We have a lot more options now than we had 11 years ago, so there's a lot more things that we can do. We have cloud workspaces now, which we use in other projects. We have WhatsApp, we have Messenger, we have Dropbox. We didn't have any of those things at the time. We had the phone, we had some webinars, and then we had the opportunity to meet in person occasionally, and that helped develop relationships. And so these are my dogs here, and, and we dressed them up the first Christmas we had them. So there they are checking each other out, and I think it's a really good example of how the groups come together and how people, as they work together, they are connecting to solve a common problem. They're looking at each other. What is this? What are you wearing? How is this? Is that okay? And they're sharing those experiences. And I just want to close with saying that one of the reasons that I thought about this program and have thought about communities of practice here is that when we were talking with the service providers and the service users as part of the project we did with Ireland, people brought us actually 6 or 7 different examples of very good efforts that are dual diagnosis programs in the country. And so the on-the-ground work is already there. People are doing it. And I see from the presentations that are here that we have a lot of other great on-the-ground work that we didn't see. Oh, yes, so thank you. So we know there's a lot of good work out there that can be shared.
Thank you so much. I think it's great to hear about a successful experience that went beyond. And I just have a couple of words in the last few minutes. I mentioned this concept of stewardship. And one of the people that has been an inspiration to me is Elinor Ostrom. She won the Nobel Prize in Economics because of her work that debunked the theory of the commons. And she said that the theory of the commons says that people can't work together to govern or take care of a shared resource. It either has to be done by the government or it has to be done broken up into the market, but people can't individually work together and have stewardship over a resource. Now, a lot of her work was with fisheries and forest, but in this work, we're thinking about having stewardship over health and mental health in our communities. And so her principles of stewardship are really valuable and important. And so she's saying that this is a responsibility to shepherd and safeguard the valuables of others, and the valuables are the health in our community. And she identified some principles about clearly defined boundaries, rules adapted to local conditions. You can see all of these: collective decision-making, monitoring by those involved, graduating sanctions for rule violators, cheap and accessible conflict resolution, power recognized by higher level of authorities and organizations, and nested layers of enterprises. And you think about your nested layer of enterprises of the primary care physician, the psychiatrist, the psychologist, the substance use providers, the peer mentors, the families, and the actual clients. That whole combination of complicated players, and the importance of, as you engage in a community of practice, having the endorsement of those to whom you report, to your higher levels of authority. And all of these things fit together with Lave and Winger, with the whole system change TA evaluation, from my examples, from Brigitta's example. And so my challenge for you, request, is for you to think about your own community of practice. You could use a little bit of the information that is the summary of some of our work, especially on the back where we talk about the policy system, organization, provider, treatment, service, and individual. But to think about who is your group that might be a community of practice? What might be your shared goal? What requests might you have for leadership? How much time do you have to spend, and how long do you want to spend? What kind of support or method of support do you want, and what is the outcome that you seek? And if you think about some of these questions to guide your design of the community of practice and use some of the resources that we've shared, then you'll be off to a good start on building your community of practice. So this is the questions that we began to look at and the some of the outcomes and recommendations that were part of our work. So thank you very much.